The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Beatrice Sullivan against the wooden frame hard enough to bruise her shoulder. And through the dust-clouded window, she saw men with bandanas covering their faces and guns drawn, circling like wolves around wounded prey. This was not what her uncle had promised when he sent the telegram 3 months ago, assuring her that Leavenworth, Kansas would provide the fresh start she desperately needed after her father's death left her penniless in Philadelphia. The year was 1876, and young women without family or fortune had few choices. So when Uncle Henry wrote that he had arranged a position for her as a schoolteacher and safe passage west, Beatrice had sold everything she owned to afford the train fare to Kansas City and this final stagecoach journey to Leavenworth. Everyone out. Now. The command came rough and impatient, followed by the metallic click of a gun being cocked. Beatrice's hands trembled as she gathered her carpet bag, the one containing everything she had left in this world. Her mother's silver brush, 3 dresses, her teaching certificate, and the carefully saved $15 she had hidden in the lining. The other passengers, a portly merchant and an older couple, moved with the rigid terror of people who had heard too many stories about what happened when you did not cooperate with road agents. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly as they stumbled out onto the dirt road, still 10 miles from Leavenworth, according to the driver who now sat with his hands raised, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. 4 men surrounded them, their eyes hard and calculating above their makeshift masks. "Valuables in the bag," the leader said, tossing a burlap sack toward the merchant. "Nice and easy, and maybe you all see tomorrow." Beatrice watched her fellow passengers comply, their wedding rings and pocket watches disappearing into the sack. When it came to her turn, her fingers refused to cooperate as she tried to unfasten the clasp of her mother's locket, the only piece of jewelry she wore. "I said nice and easy, lady." The outlaw stepped closer, and she could smell whiskey and sweat on him. "Please," Beatrice heard herself say, hating the quaver in her voice. "This was my mother's. It has no value to anyone but me. Gold's got value to everyone." His hands shot out and grabbed the chain, yanking hard enough that the clasp broke and the delicate necklace came free, taking a few strands of her dark hair with it. Something in Beatrice snapped then, some final thread of composure that had been holding her together through all the losses of the past year. She lunged for the locket, her hand closing around the outlaw's wrist. "Give it back!" The man's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. He raised his other hand, the one holding the gun, and Beatrice saw her own death in that gesture, understood with perfect clarity that she had made a fatal mistake. The gunshot cracked across the empty Kansas prairie, but Beatrice felt no pain. Instead, the outlaw in front of her jerked backward, a red stain blooming on his shoulder, and his gun fell to the dust. Chaos erupted as the other bandits spun around, searching for the source of the shot. "Next one goes between the eyes," a voice called out, calm and steady as stone. "Drop your weapons and ride out, or drop where you stand. Your choice." Beatrice turned with the others to see a lone rider sitting astride a bay horse about 30 yards distant, a rifle still raised to his shoulder. Even from that distance, she could see he wore the dust-stained clothes of a working cowboy. Leather chaps over worn denim, a sun-faded shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his posture that struck her, the absolute confidence of someone who had made that shot 100 times and could make it 100 more. The wounded outlaw clutched his shoulder, cursing. "There's 4 of us and 1 of you, cowboy. 3 of you that can still shoot, and I have a dozen rounds in this Winchester and a Colt on my hip. Mathematics say I win." The rider urged his horse forward a few steps, and Beatrice could see him more clearly now. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "But I am feeling generous today, seeing as it is Sunday and all. Ride out now, leave these people be, and we will call it even." The outlaws exchanged glances, weighing their options. The one Beatrice had grabbed still had her mother's locket clutched in his fist, and she watched helplessly as he stuffed it into his pocket. "My locket," she called out to the cowboy. "He has my mother's locket." The rider's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Toss it down, the necklace. Now." "Or what? You already shot me." "Shoulder wound is not the same as what comes next. The lady wants her property. I suggest you oblige." Something in the cowboy's voice must have convinced the outlaw that this was not a bluff. With a muttered curse, he pulled the locket from his pocket and threw it on the ground. Then he and his companions mounted their horses and rode off toward the horizon, leaving a trail of dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Beatrice's legs suddenly felt like water, and she sank down onto the road, her breath coming in short gasps as the reality of what had just happened crashed over her. She could have died. Would have died, if not for the stranger who now dismounted and walked toward them, his rifle held casually in the crook of his arm. "Everyone all right?" he asked, his voice gentler now that the threat had passed. The older couple nodded shakily, and the merchant let out a nervous laugh. The stagecoach driver cleared his throat. "Obliged to you, mister. That was some fine shooting. Just happened to be riding this way." The cowboy bent down and picked up the locket from the dust, brushing it off carefully before approaching Beatrice. "I believe this is yours, miss." She looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. He had a strong, honest face, with a slight scar above his left eyebrow and eyes the color of the summer sky. When he held out the locket, his hand was steady, unmarked by the violence he had just committed on her behalf. "Thank you," Beatrice managed, taking the necklace with trembling fingers. "You saved my life." "You were doing a fair job of ending it yourself," he said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. "Grabbing an armed man twice your size, that took either courage or foolishness." "Foolishness," she admitted. "Definitely foolishness, but it was my mother's and I already lost so much." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding. He offered her his hand. "Let me help you up." His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm as he pulled her to her feet. Beatrice found herself standing closer to him than was entirely proper, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the dust on his collar, the capable strength in his shoulders. "I am Beatrice Sullivan," she said, stepping back and trying to regain some composure. "I was traveling to Leavenworth." "Ezra Porter," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. Where are you coming from, Philadelphia?" "I am supposed to be the new school teacher, if I ever actually make it there." "We can remedy that." Ezra turned to the driver. "You feel up to continuing on?" The driver nodded, already climbing back onto his seat. "Road agents do not usually hit the same stretch twice in one day." "Should be clear from here." "I will ride alongside you anyway," Ezra said, "just to be certain." The remainder of the journey passed without incident, though Beatrice found herself acutely aware of Ezra Porter riding just outside her window, his presence both reassuring and unsettling in equal measure. She tried to focus on the landscape rolling past, the endless prairie grass and distant horizon, but her eyes kept drifting back to him. When they finally rolled into Leavenworth, the town was bigger than Beatrice had expected, with wide streets and substantial brick buildings that spoke of prosperity and permanence. The stagecoach stopped in front of the depot, and passengers began to disembark with visible relief. Ezra dismounted and came to help Beatrice down, his hand steadying her as she stepped onto solid ground. "Do you know where you are headed?" "My uncle, Henry Sullivan. He runs the general store, or so his letters said." "Sullivan's Mercantile, I know it, 3 streets over." Ezra picked up her carpet bag before she could protest. "I will walk you there." "You have done more than enough already, Mr. Porter. I cannot impose further." "It is not an imposition." He started walking, and Beatrice had no choice but to follow. "Besides, your uncle will want to hear about what happened on the road. The sheriff, too, most likely." They walked in silence for a minute, Beatrice very conscious of the curious glances from townspeople who recognized Ezra and were clearly wondering about his female companion. Leavenworth was bustling with activity, wagons rolling past, merchants calling out their wares, the smell of fresh bread mixing with dust and horse. "Have you been ranching long?" she asked, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity, though once the words were out she found she did want to know. 5 years now. Bought the land with money I saved up from working cattle drives. It is not much yet, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from building something with your own hands. "Mostly horses now. Found I have a talent for training them. That must be satisfying work." "It is. Honest work anyway." He glanced at her. "Teaching school must be the same honest work." "I hope so." "I have never actually taught before, not a full classroom. I worked as a governess for a year in Philadelphia, but that was only 2 children." The admission made her nervous. What if she was not good enough? What if she had come all this way only to fail? "The children here are not much different from children anywhere else, I imagine. They will test you at first, see what you are made of." Ezra's expression was thoughtful. "But anyone brave enough to grab an armed outlaw can probably handle a roomful of 8-year-olds. Despite everything, Beatrice laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its sudden lightness. "When you put it that way." They turned onto a street lined with shops, and Ezra stopped in front of a well-maintained storefront with Sullivan's Mercantile painted in neat letters across the window. Through the glass, Beatrice could see shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to farming equipment. "This is it," Ezra said, setting down her bag. "Your uncle seems like a decent man. I have bought supplies from him a few times." Beatrice looked at the store, then back at Ezra, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye to the man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. "I do not know how to thank you properly, Mr. Porter, for what you did." "No thanks needed. I am just glad I was riding that road today." He touched his hat again. "Welcome to Leavenworth, Miss Sullivan. I suspect I will see you around town." Before she could respond, the door to the Mercantile burst open and a portly man with thinning hair and kind eyes rushed out. "Beatrice, is that you? Oh, my dear girl, you are finally here." Uncle Henry swept her into an embrace that smelled of pipe tobacco and peppermint. And by the time Beatrice disentangled herself and turned around, Ezra Porter was already walking away, leading his horse down the street. She watched him go, this stranger who had become her savior, and wondered if fate would indeed bring them together again in this frontier town. Uncle Henry ushered her inside, talking a mile a minute about the room he had prepared for her upstairs, the school that would open in 2 weeks, all the people she would need to meet. But Beatrice's mind was still on the dusty road, on the moment when death had been a heartbeat away, and on the calm voice that had called it back. That night, lying in the small but comfortable room above the Mercantile, Beatrice held her mother's locket and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. She cried for her father, for the home she had lost, for the terrifying vulnerability of being alone in the world. But beneath the tears was something else, something she did not quite have words for yet. The memory of steady hands and steady eyes, of a man who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. The next morning brought Sunday services, and Uncle Henry insisted Beatrice accompany him to church despite her exhaustion. "The whole town will want to meet their new school teacher," he said cheerfully. "Best to get it over with all at once." The church was a modest wooden building with a tall steeple, and it seemed as though half of Leavenworth had indeed turned out for the service. Beatrice found herself shaking hands and forgetting names almost as quickly as she heard them, overwhelmed by the parade of faces and well wishes. Then she saw Ezra Porter. He was sitting near the back, hat in his hands, his Sunday clothes only marginally cleaner than what he had worn yesterday. Their eyes met across the crowded church, and he nodded once, a gesture of recognition that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. After the service, Beatrice found herself swept up in a tide of introductions and invitations to tea, but she kept losing track of conversations, her attention drawn repeatedly to where Ezra stood talking with a group of ranchers near the door. He seemed different here, more relaxed, laughing at something one of the other men said. "That's Ezra Porter you keep looking at," Uncle Henry said quietly, following her gaze. "Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, works hard. His ranch is starting to develop a reputation for quality horses." "He saved my life yesterday," Beatrice said, and proceeded to tell her uncle about the attempted robbery. Uncle Henry's face went pale, then red with anger. "Those damned outlaws. Pardon my language, but they have been getting bolder. The sheriff will want to know about this." He squeezed her shoulder. "Thank God Ezra was there." "Yes," Beatrice agreed softly. "Thank God." As if sensing he was being discussed, Ezra looked over at that moment. He excused himself from his companions and made his way through the crowd toward them. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, shaking Uncle Henry's hand, "I see your niece arrived safely eventually. She told me what happened. I am in your debt, Mr. Porter. No debt. I am just glad the situation resolved itself." Ezra turned to Beatrice. "How are you feeling today, Miss Sullivan?" "Yesterday was quite an ordeal. Better, thank you, though I confess I did not sleep very well." "That is to be expected. First few times someone points a gun at you, it tends to stick in your mind." "First few times," Beatrice repeated. "How often does that happen?" "Less now than it used to back when I was driving cattle up from Texas. The frontier is getting more civilized, slowly but surely." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "I was wondering, Miss Sullivan, if you might like to see the town properly. I realize we met under unusual circumstances, but I thought perhaps I could show you around, help you get your bearings. If your uncle has no objections, of course." Uncle Henry beamed. "None at all. Excellent idea. Beatrice needs to know her way around before school starts." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. Was Ezra Porter asking to spend time with her? It certainly seemed that way, though his manner was so straightforward it was hard to tell if his interest was merely friendly or something more. "That would be very kind," she said. "I would like that." They arranged to meet the following afternoon, and Beatrice spent the rest of the day in a state of nervous anticipation she told herself was ridiculous. He was simply being neighborly, helping a newcomer get settled. The fact that he was handsome and brave and had saved her life had nothing to do with the flutter in her stomach every time she thought about seeing him again. Monday dawned clear and hot, the Kansas summer asserting itself with relentless sunshine. Beatrice dressed carefully in her lightest cotton dress, then felt foolish for taking such pains over a simple tour of the town. But when Ezra arrived at the Mercantile at 2 o'clock, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt, she was glad she had made the effort. "Ready to see Leavenworth?" he asked, offering his arm. They walked slowly through the streets, Ezra pointing out the important establishments. The bank, the sheriff's office, the hotel where the town council met, the newspaper office. But he also showed her the less obvious places. The cafe that made the best apple pie. The stable where the owner would give her fair prices if she ever needed to rent a horse. The park by the river where children played. "It is not Philadelphia," Ezra said as they stood on the banks of the Missouri River, watching the brown water flow past. "I imagine this must seem small and rough to you." "Different," Beatrice corrected, "but not bad different. Philadelphia had more people, more buildings, but I cannot say it had more heart." She turned to look at him. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Porter?" "Ezra, please, and ask away." "Why did you help me? Not just stopping the robbery, though I am grateful for that, but this today. Showing me around. You barely know me." Ezra was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the river. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My mother died when I was 10. Fever took her fast and mean. My father tried to keep our farm back in Missouri going, but his heart was not in it anymore. He started drinking, and 2 years later he was gone too. I ended up working odd jobs, sleeping in barns, whatever I could find to stay alive." "I am so sorry," Beatrice said quietly. "It was a long time ago, but I remember what it felt like to be alone in the world, to have no one at your back. When I saw you yesterday, standing up to that outlaw, even though you were terrified, trying to hold onto the last piece of your mother you had left, I saw something of myself." He looked at her directly. "I guess I helped you because I wish someone had helped me back when I needed it." The honesty in his words touched something deep in Beatrice's chest. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his where it rested on the fence rail. "Someone did help you in the end. You built a life for yourself. That took strength. We all have strength we do not know about until we need it." His hand turned beneath hers, his fingers curling around her palm. "You have it too. I saw it yesterday." They stood like that for a long moment, hands joined, the river murmuring past and the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. Beatrice knew she should pull away, that this was too intimate for two people who had only just met, but she could not make herself break the connection. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, her voice a little breathless. "What is it like?" Ezra's face lit up in a way she had not seen before, enthusiasm replacing his usual careful reserve. "It is still raw, still being built. I have a small house, a barn, corrals for the horses, about 200 acres, most of it grazing land. I have 6 horses right now, 4 I am training to sell and 2 that are mine." He paused. "It is not much to look at yet, but I have plans. A bigger house eventually, more land, a real breeding operation." "It sounds wonderful," Beatrice said, and meant it. She could hear the pride and hope in his voice, could picture him working sunrise to sunset to make his dreams real. "Would you like to see it sometime?" The question came out rushed, as if he was afraid he might lose his nerve. "I know it is not entirely proper, but your uncle could come along, or I could drive you out in the wagon so it is all above board." "I would love to see it," Beatrice replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. They made plans for the following Sunday after church, and when Ezra walked her back to the mercantile, Beatrice felt as though something important had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. He was no longer just the cowboy who had saved her life. He was becoming something more, though she was almost afraid to examine what that might mean. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the school term. Beatrice met with the town council, reviewed her curriculum, organized the small schoolhouse that would be her domain. But through it all, she found herself thinking about Ezra, replaying their conversations, anticipating their planned visit to his ranch. They saw each other in passing, brief encounters on the street or at church. But those moments were enough to sustain the growing warmth Beatrice felt whenever she thought of him. The way his face softened when he smiled at her, the respect with which he treated her opinions, the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him, all of it drew her in deeper. Finally, Sunday arrived. After church, Uncle Henry, Beatrice, and Ezra climbed into Ezra's wagon for the drive to his ranch. Uncle Henry kept up a steady stream of conversation, but Beatrice barely heard him, too conscious of Ezra beside her on the bench seat, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as the wagon bounced over ruts in the road. The ranch, when they arrived, was exactly as Ezra had described. Modest but well-maintained, with a small wooden house, a sturdy barn, and several corrals where horses grazed in the afternoon sun. But what struck Beatrice most was the sense of possibility about the place, the feeling that this was just the beginning of something larger. "Let me show you the horses," Ezra said, helping her down from the wagon with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her waist. They walked to the nearest corral where a beautiful chestnut mare watched them with intelligent eyes. "This is Juniper," Ezra said. "I am training her for a rancher over in Atchison. She was completely wild 6 months ago, would not let anyone near her. Now look." He climbed over the fence and walked slowly toward the mare, his movements calm and unhurried. Juniper whickered softly and came to him, nuzzling his shoulder as he stroked her neck. The trust between them was obvious, and Beatrice found herself moved by the gentleness in Ezra's touch. "She is beautiful," Beatrice said. "You must be very patient to train a wild horse. Patience and respect. You cannot force a horse to trust you. You have to earn it day by day, proving you will not hurt them." He looked at Beatrice over Juniper's back. "Most things worth having work that way, I find." The weight of his gaze made her breath catch. Was he still talking about horses, or something else? Uncle Henry, diplomatically, had wandered off to examine the barn, giving them a measure of privacy. Ezra climbed back over the fence and stood close to Beatrice, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. "Can I be honest with you?" he asked quietly. "Please. I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that day on the road. I know we have only just met, and maybe it is too soon to say such things, but I believe in speaking plain. I would like to court you properly, Beatrice, if you are willing." Her heart hammered against her ribs. In the 2 weeks since arriving in Leavenworth, Beatrice had been telling herself to be practical, to focus on her teaching position and building a stable life. But standing here in the Kansas sunshine, looking into Ezra Porter's earnest eyes, practicality seemed vastly overrated. "I would like that very much," she said. The smile that broke across Ezra's face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers, and for the first time since her father's death, Beatrice felt something that might have been hope. The courting that followed was by necessity constrained by propriety and by their respective responsibilities. Ezra's ranch demanded long days of hard work, and Beatrice's teaching position, once school started in September, consumed most of her waking hours. But they carved out time for each other whenever possible. Sunday dinners at the Mercantile with Uncle Henry chaperoning, evening walks through town, stolen conversations after church. Beatrice discovered that Ezra was more than the quiet cowboy he appeared at first glance. He read voraciously, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them, and had opinions on everything from politics to poetry. He made her laugh with dry observations about town gossip, and impressed her with his thoughtful questions about her teaching methods. For his part, Ezra seemed fascinated by Beatrice's stories of life back east, the theaters and museums and crowds of people. But more than that, He admired her dedication to her students, the way she refused to give up on even the most challenging children. "You have a gift," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of the Mercantile, watching the sun set over Leavenworth. "The way you talk about those children, you can see the potential in each one." "They deserve someone who believes in them," Beatrice replied. "Some of them come from such difficult circumstances. If I can give them an education, tools to build a better life, then maybe I have done something worthwhile." "You are doing more than worthwhile. You are changing lives." Ezra reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the past months. "You changed mine." "Ezra." His name was a whisper on her lips. "It is true. Before I met you, I was content with my ranch, my horses, my solitary life. But now I want more. I want a future that includes you." The intensity in his voice sent shivers down her spine. They had been courting for 3 months now, and Beatrice knew without doubt that she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with this man. The way he made her feel safe and cherished, the way he supported her dreams while pursuing his own, the way he looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in his world. All of it had woven itself into her heart until she could not imagine a life without him. "I want that too," she said softly. "More than I can say." Ezra stood, pulling her gently to her feet. They were alone on the porch, Uncle Henry having gone to bed an hour earlier. In the fading light, Ezra cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Beatrice Sullivan. I think I have loved you since the moment you grabbed that outlaw's wrist, foolish and brave and absolutely beautiful." Tears pricked her eyes. "I love you too. So much it frightens me sometimes. Do not be frightened." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. Beatrice melted into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart thundering beneath her palms. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. I know we have not been courting long, but I am certain. You are what I want, what I need. Say yes." "Yes," Beatrice breathed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Ezra, of course yes." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Beatrice felt as though she was floating, unmoored from earth by the sheer joy flooding through her. She had come west looking for safety and stability, and instead she had found love, the wild, breathtaking, terrifying kind that changed everything. They were married 6 weeks later in the same church where they had first spoken after the stagecoach incident. Beatrice wore her mother's locket and a simple white dress made by the town seamstress, and Ezra wore a new suit that made him look slightly uncomfortable but impossibly handsome. Uncle Henry gave her away with tears in his eyes, and half of Leavenworth turned out to witness the union. The winter of 1876 was bitterly cold, but Beatrice barely noticed, wrapped as she was in the warmth of new marriage and the life she was building with Ezra. She continued teaching while Ezra worked the ranch, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire in their small house, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. Ezra was an attentive husband, always conscious of her comfort and happiness. He helped her grade papers when she was overwhelmed, rode into town in blizzards to walk her home from school, and listened with genuine interest to her stories about her students. In turn, Beatrice learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping with the horses when she could, managing their modest household, and dreaming with Ezra about the future they would create together. "I want to add on to the house," Ezra said one snowy evening in January, spreading a rough sketch across the kitchen table. 2 more rooms, maybe 3. We will need space for children eventually." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. They had not yet talked explicitly about starting a family, though the subject hung unspoken between them. Eventually, Ezra looked up, his eyes searching hers. "I was thinking maybe sooner rather than later, if you want that. I know your teaching is important to you, and I would never ask you to give that up if you are not ready." "I want children with you," Beatrice said firmly, "and I can teach and be a mother. Other women manage it. Other women are not married to men as lucky as me." Ezra pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Have I told you today how much I love you? Only 3 times. You are getting lax in your duties, Mr. Porter. Allow me to remedy that immediately." His lips found hers, the kiss deepening as his hands tangled in her hair. These moments of passion still felt new and slightly forbidden to Beatrice, but also achingly right, the physical expression of the love that bound them together. By spring, Beatrice knew she was pregnant. The realization brought joy and terror in equal measure. She was only 22 years old, far from the medical care she had known back east, about to bring a child into the rough frontier world of Kansas. But when she told Ezra, his reaction banished her fears. He picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to be parents. Beatrice, we are going to be parents. I am terrified," she admitted. "So am I." He set her down carefully as if she might break. "But we will figure it out together. That is what we do." Beatrice continued teaching through the spring term, and the town women rallied around her with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. She had worried about being accepted in Leavenworth, but over the past months, the community had embraced her as one of their own. When she finally had to stop teaching in late summer, her students presented her with a handmade quilt, each square embroidered with their names. "You will come back, won't you?" asked Sally, one of her brightest pupils. "After the baby comes." "I will," Beatrice promised, though she was not sure how she would manage. But she had learned that promises to children were sacred, and she would find a way. The baby came in October 1877, after 16 hours of labor that left Beatrice convinced she would not survive. But the local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, talked her through each contraction, and Ezra held her hand and refused to leave even when Mrs. Patterson suggested he might be more comfortable outside. "I am not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Beatrice needs me." When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs, Beatrice wept with relief and overwhelming love. Ezra took his son with trembling hands, his face a picture of wonder. "He is perfect," Ezra whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas Henry Porter, after Beatrice's father and uncle, and he became the center of their world. Ezra proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas at night so Beatrice could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, talking to his son as if he could understand every word. "You are going to grow up strong and honest," Ezra told Thomas during one of these late-night sessions, while Beatrice watched from the doorway. "And you are going to know you are loved every single day of your life. That is a promise." Beatrice's heart swelled with love for her husband, for the man who had saved her life and then given her a life worth saving. She had been promised safety when she came west, but what she had found instead was so much more. Danger, yes, but also courage, love, partnership, and a future bright with possibility. True to her word, Beatrice returned to teaching when Thomas was 6 months old, bringing him to the schoolhouse in a basket where he napped peacefully while she conducted lessons. The children adored having a baby in the classroom, and the older girls competed for the privilege of holding him during recess. The years that followed were not without challenges. Droughts tested the ranch, childhood illnesses frightened them, and there were times when money was tight. But through it all, Beatrice and Ezra faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with every shared trial. In the spring of 1880, their second child arrived, a daughter they named Charlotte Rose. She was as different from Thomas as possible, a quiet, contemplative baby who studied the world with serious eyes. Thomas, now nearly 3, was immediately protective of his little sister, insisting on helping with everything from bath time to feeding. "You have done well," Uncle Henry told Beatrice one Sunday after church, watching her children play in the grass while Ezra discussed horse training with another rancher. "Your father would be so proud of you." "I hope so," Beatrice said softly. "I think about him often, wish he could have met Ezra and the children." "He knows," Uncle Henry assured her. "Somehow he knows." By 1882, the ranch had grown substantially. Ezra's reputation for training quality horses had spread throughout Kansas and into neighboring states, and there was more business than he could handle alone. He hired 2 ranch hands and began planning the larger house he had dreamed about years earlier. "We need more space," he said, showing Beatrice the new drawings. "Thomas needs his own room and Charlotte will need hers soon enough, and if we keep going at this rate, we might need even more bedrooms." Beatrice laughed. "Are you suggesting something, Mr. Porter?" "Only that I would not object to a larger family, if you are agreeable, Mrs. Porter." Their third child, another boy they named Samuel, was born in the new house in 1883. The expansion had taken a year to complete, and the result was a comfortable, spacious home that felt like a true family residence rather than a bachelor's cabin. Beatrice had a proper kitchen, a parlor for entertaining, and enough bedrooms for their growing family. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both busy and deeply satisfying. Beatrice taught during the school year, managing her household and children with the help of a local girl who came in 3 days a week. Ezra continued building his horse breeding operation, and their reputation in the community grew in the evenings. After the children were in bed, Beatrice and Ezra would sit on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink. Sometimes they talked, sharing the details of their days. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, content simply to be together. "You ever regret it?" Ezra asked one evening in the summer of 1885. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming west?" Beatrice turned to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. 9 years had passed since that terrifying day on the stagecoach, 9 years of joy and struggle and love. Ezra had a few more lines around his eyes now, and his hands bore the calluses and scars of hard work, but he was still the same man who had ridden out of the dust to save her life. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. That day when those outlaws stopped the stagecoach, I thought my life was ending, but it was really just beginning." "I think about that day too," Ezra admitted. "What if I had ridden a different road? What if I had been an hour earlier or later? We might never have met." "But you were there, exactly when I needed you." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "You saved me, Ezra, not just from the outlaws, but from a life of fear and loneliness. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You gave me the same." Ezra lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Porter, the very best thing." As they sat together in the fading light, their children sleeping safely inside the house they had built together, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been promised safety, but found danger. Yet from that danger had emerged the greatest gift of her life. A cowboy who had become her partner, her love, her home. The promise of safety had been broken that day on the road to Leavenworth. But Ezra had made a different promise, unspoken but absolute. He had promised to stand beside her, to protect her, to love her through whatever challenges life brought. And unlike that first promise, this one had been kept, was being kept, would be kept for all the years to come. In 1888, as Thomas prepared to start helping seriously on the ranch, and Charlotte began showing signs of inheriting her mother's love of teaching, Beatrice stood in her kitchen preparing breakfast and felt a wave of contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Through the window, she could see Ezra working with a young horse in the corral, patient and steady as always. Samuel played at his feet, building something elaborate with wooden blocks. This was her life now, chaotic and demanding and absolutely perfect. She thought of the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 12 years ago, clutching a carpetbag and a broken locket, desperately hoping for safety in an unknown land. That woman could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that danger and violence would lead to such profound happiness. But life, Beatrice had learned, rarely went according to plan. The best things often emerged from the worst moments, and the promises that mattered most were the ones kept through action rather than words. Ezra came in from the corral, dusty and smiling, and kissed her cheek as he passed. "Morning smells good." "Everything is good," Beatrice replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The children thundered downstairs, bringing noise and energy and the particular chaos of a young family. Thomas was arguing with Charlotte about something. Samuel was demanding pancakes, and the morning routine unfolded in its familiar, wonderful way. Later, after the children had scattered to their various activities, and Ezra had returned to his work, Beatrice took a moment to open her mother's locket, now repaired and hanging once again around her neck. Inside were two small photographs, one of her parents, taken years ago in Philadelphia, and one of Ezra holding baby Thomas, added after their marriage. Past and present, loss and love, all contained in one small piece of gold. Beatrice closed the locket and pressed it against her heart, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange and winding path that had brought her here. The years continued to roll forward, bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1890, Uncle Henry's health began to fail, and Beatrice spent many hours at his bedside, reading to him and holding his hand as he had once held hers. He passed peacefully that autumn, and at his funeral, the church overflowed with townspeople whose lives he had touched. "He loved you very much," Ezra told Beatrice as they stood by the grave. "He told me once that bringing you to Leavenworth was the best thing he ever did, watching you flourish here. He gave me a chance when I had nothing," Beatrice said through her tears. "A chance at a new life. And you made the most of it. He was proud of you, Beatrice. So proud." Uncle Henry's will left the mercantile to Beatrice, and after much discussion, she and Ezra decided to keep it running, hiring a manager to oversee the daily operations. The income supplemented the ranch nicely and provided employment for 3 local families, which felt like a fitting tribute to Uncle Henry's generosity. By 1892, Thomas was 15 and working the ranch alongside his father with increasing skill and confidence. He had inherited Ezra's way with horses and was already talking about expanding the breeding operation even further. Charlotte, at 12, was helping Beatrice at the school 3 days a week and showing genuine teaching talent. Samuel, now 9, was still figuring out where his interests lay, trying everything from ranching to carpentry to studying law books borrowed from the town lawyer. "We made some fine children," Ezra observed one evening, watching their 3 offspring engaged in an animated debate about something at the dinner table. "We did," Beatrice agreed. They are going to do remarkable things, all of them. They learned from a remarkable mother. Ezra pulled her close, his arm around her waist in the easy affection that had characterized their marriage from the beginning. Have I mentioned lately how much I love you? Not in at least 3 hours, definitely slacking. He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and kissed the top of her head. These small moments of connection, scattered throughout their days, were the foundation of everything they had built together. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but steady, daily choosing each other, over and over again. In 1894, tragedy struck when a fire destroyed the barn, killing 2 horses and coming dangerously close to the house. The family escaped unharmed, but the loss was devastating, both emotionally and financially. Ezra stood in the ashes of his barn, his face drawn with grief and stress. "We will rebuild," Beatrice said firmly, taking his hand. "We have done it before. The horses I lost, I was training them for the Hendersons. I will have to refund their money we do not have right now. Then we will figure it out. We have savings from the mercantile. We have friends who will help. We have each other, Ezra. That is what matters." He turned to her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I do not deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world," Beatrice said against his chest, "and I am going to make sure you get it." The community rallied around them, as Beatrice had known they would. Within a week, there was a barn raising, with dozens of neighbors showing up to help rebuild. The Henderson family, when they heard what happened, told Ezra to keep the deposit and invited him to visit their ranch to select replacement horses to train once he was ready. "This is what I love about the West," Ezra said, watching the new barn take shape. "People take care of each other." "You have spent 16 years taking care of people," Beatrice reminded him. "Training horses fairly, helping neighbors, being honest in your dealings. Now they are returning the favor." By fall, the ranch was not only recovered but thriving. The new barn was bigger than the old one, and Ezra had 3 new horses in training. Thomas had proven himself invaluable during the crisis, taking on adult responsibilities without complaint. The experience had brought the family even closer together, reminded them of what really mattered. As 1895 arrived, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the 19 years since she had first arrived in Leavenworth, terrified and alone. She was 40 years old now, with grown and growing children, a successful teaching career, a prosperous ranch, and a marriage that had only deepened with time. "What are you thinking about?" Ezra asked, joining her on the porch where she had been watching the winter sunset. "How far we have come, how much has changed." "Not everything has changed." He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in the gesture that had become their signature affection. "I still love you exactly as much as I did the day I married you. More, actually. I did not know it was possible to love someone more every year, but you taught me it is." "Ezra Porter, are you getting sentimental in your old age?" "Old age? I am 44, Beatrice. That is hardly ancient. Ancient enough to have earned some sentiment." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horses and leather and the particular soap he favored. "I love you too. So much that sometimes it overwhelms me, the sheer scope of it." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children were going about their evening routines, the sounds of normal family life drifting through the open window. This was peace, Beatrice thought. This was what she had been searching for all those years ago, though she had not known it at the time. In 1897, Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Atchison, a smart, capable young woman named Rebecca, who fit seamlessly into the family. The wedding was a joyous occasion, and watching her son pledge his life to another person, Beatrice was struck by how much he resembled his father. The same steady strength, the same honest eyes, the same capacity for deep, enduring love. "We raised him right," Ezra whispered during the ceremony, his voice thick with emotion. "We did," Beatrice agreed, tears streaming down her face. Charlotte announced her intention to attend the new teachers' college that had opened in Kansas City, determined to bring modern educational methods back to Leavenworth. Beatrice helped her pack, proud and slightly heartbroken at the thought of her daughter venturing out into the wider world. "I learned everything from you," Charlotte said as they folded dresses into a trunk. "How to be strong, how to stand up for what I believe in, how to make a difference. Thank you, Mother." "You have always had that strength in you," Beatrice replied. "I just helped you find it." Samuel, after much experimentation, decided he wanted to study law, and arrangements were made for him to apprentice with the town lawyer starting in 1898. He was the most intellectual of their children, always reading, always questioning, and Beatrice suspected he would end up in politics eventually. 3 children, 3 completely different paths, Ezra observed, but all of them good, solid people. "They learned from the best father a child could ask for," Beatrice said. "You showed them what integrity looks like, what hard work means, what it means to love your family. We did that together." "Yes," Beatrice agreed softly. "Together." As the century drew to a close, Beatrice began to think about her legacy, what she would leave behind when her time came. The answer seemed obvious: her children, her students, the community she had served for more than 2 decades. But more than that, she and Ezra had created something rare and precious, a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering commitment. In 1899, the town of Leavenworth held a celebration for Beatrice's 25 years of teaching. The schoolhouse was packed with former students, some now parents themselves, all eager to express their gratitude for the education and encouragement she had provided. "Mrs. Porter taught me to read," said one man, now a successful merchant. "My parents were illiterate, and I would have been too if not for her patience. She taught me that being female did not mean I could not have dreams," said a young woman who had gone on to become a journalist. "She showed me what was possible." Story after story, testament after testament, until Beatrice was overwhelmed with emotion. Ezra stood beside her throughout the evening, his pride in her accomplishments evident in every glance, every touch. "You changed this town," he told her later as they drove home under a canopy of stars. "You changed hundreds of lives." "I just did my job," Beatrice protested. "No, you did far more than that. You gave children hope, tools to build better futures. That is not just a job, Beatrice. That is a calling, and you answered it beautifully." The new century arrived with festivities and optimism, the feeling that anything was possible in this modern age. Beatrice was 45 now, Ezra 49, and they were settling into the comfortable rhythms of middle age. Their children were launched into their own lives. The ranch was prosperous, and Beatrice continued to teach, though she had reduced her hours to 3 days a week. In the spring of 1901, Thomas and Rebecca presented them with their first grandchild, a boy named Henry after Beatrice's uncle. Holding that tiny, perfect baby, Beatrice felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered to Henry. "Welcome to the world. You have no idea how much you are already loved." Ezra, watching his wife with their grandson, felt his heart swell with love so profound it was almost painful. 24 years of marriage had not dimmed his feelings for Beatrice one bit. If anything, watching her become a mother, a teacher, a pillar of the community had only increased his admiration and love. "You are going to spoil that child rotten," he observed, smiling. "That is a grandparent's prerogative," Beatrice replied, not taking her eyes off Henry. "Besides, you are going to be right there with me, spoiling him just as badly." Cannot argue with that. As the years continued their steady march forward, more grandchildren arrived. Charlotte married a fellow teacher and had twins, a boy and a girl, in 1903. Samuel married a lawyer's daughter and brought her back to Leavenworth, where they started their own family. The Porter homestead became the center of a growing clan, with Sunday dinners that required 2 tables and enough noise to wake the dead. "This is what I always wanted," Ezra said during one such gathering, watching 3 generations of his family interact. "Roots, people, a place that matters." "You built it," Beatrice reminded him, "with your own 2 hands and your stubborn determination." "We built it," Ezra corrected. "Every bit of it together." In 1905, Beatrice finally retired from teaching at age 50. It was a bittersweet decision, but her energy was not what it once was, and she wanted to spend her time with her grandchildren, passing on the stories and lessons that mattered. The town held another celebration, renaming the school Sullivan Porter Academy in honor of both her and Uncle Henry. "I do not know what to say," Beatrice admitted, standing before the crowd at the dedication ceremony. "Teaching has been my life's work, my passion, my purpose. Thank you for allowing me to serve this community, for trusting me with your children. It has been the greatest honor of my life." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ezra, standing in the front row, had tears streaming down his weathered face. His Beatrice, the frightened girl who had stepped off that stagecoach 3 decades ago, had become a legend in her own right. That night, lying in bed in the house they had built and expanded and filled with love, Beatrice turned to Ezra and said, "Do you remember the day we met?" "Every detail," he replied immediately. "You were wearing a gray traveling dress, and your hair was coming loose from its pins. You looked terrified but trying so hard to be brave. And when you grabbed that outlaw's wrist, I thought you were the most courageous woman I had ever seen." "I was not courageous. I was desperate and foolish. You were magnificent." Ezra pulled her close, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "You have been magnificent every day since. I only survived because of you. You saved me, Ezra." "In every way a person can be saved." "No, sweetheart, we saved each other." Beatrice thought about that, about the truth in his words. Yes, Ezra had rescued her from the outlaws, had courted her and married her and built a life with her. But she had rescued him too, had taken a lonely cowboy with a small ranch and dreams of something more, and helped him create a family, a legacy, a home filled with love and laughter. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had built something neither could have achieved alone. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for nearly 3 decades, Beatrice felt a peace so complete it was almost transcendent. She had been promised safety but found danger. The cowboy had become the promise that was kept. And from that foundation, they had built a love story for the ages. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Beatrice gardened and spoiled grandchildren and wrote long letters to Charlotte, who had moved to Kansas City with her husband. Ezra reduced his work on the ranch, turning over more responsibility to Thomas while still training a few special horses each year. They traveled occasionally, visiting their children and seeing parts of the country they had only read about. But mostly, they stayed in Leavenworth, in the house that had been their sanctuary for so many years. They walked through town hand in hand, 2 fixtures of the community who had been there so long they were part of its very fabric. People greeted them with affection and respect, and children who had never been in Beatrice's classroom still called her Mrs. Porter with reverence, having heard the stories from their parents. In 1910, The town celebrated the 50th anniversary of Kansas's statehood, and Beatrice and Ezra were asked to speak about their experiences building a life in the frontier. Standing on a platform in the town square, looking out at hundreds of familiar faces, Beatrice felt the weight of history. "When I came to Kansas in 1876, I thought I was leaving civilization behind," she said. "I thought the West was wild and dangerous and untamed, and in some ways it was. But what I found here was something more important than safety or civilization. I found community, I found purpose, I found love." She reached for Ezra's hand. "This man, my husband, saved my life on the road to Leavenworth. But more than that, he showed me what was possible when two people commit to building something together. We created a family, a home, a legacy, and we did it here in this town with these people." Ezra spoke next, his voice still strong despite his 64 years. "I came to Kansas with nothing but a bedroll and ambition. I worked hard, saved my money, bought my ranch, but I was lonely, even if I would not admit it. Then Beatrice came into my life and everything changed. She taught me that wealth is not measured in acres or horses, but in the people you love and the difference you make. Everything good in my life stems from the day I met her." The crowd cheered, and later at the reception, person after person approached them to share their own stories of how Beatrice and Ezra had impacted their lives. It was humbling and overwhelming and deeply satisfying. "We did all right," Ezra said that evening, relaxing on their porch with Beatrice beside him. "Did not we? We did more than all right," Beatrice replied. "We did something extraordinary." As Ezra turned 70 in 1916, his health began to slow him down, though his mind remained sharp and his love for his family undiminished. Beatrice, at 61, was still active and engaged, but she found herself treasuring every moment with her husband, acutely aware that their time was finite. They had been married 40 years, together for 41 years, and the depth of their bond was visible to everyone who saw them. The way they communicated without words, anticipated each other's needs, moved through life as a single unit forged from two separate souls. It was the kind of love people wrote songs about, the kind that came along once in a generation if you were lucky. "You have any regrets?" Beatrice asked one lazy Sunday afternoon as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch, watching grandchildren play in the yard. Ezra considered the question seriously, as he considered all her questions. "I regret not meeting you sooner, but then, maybe we needed to be exactly who we were when we met for it to work the way it did. So maybe that is not a real regret." He squeezed her hand. "No, Beatrice, I have no regrets." "You?" "None," she said firmly. "Not a single one. My life has been exactly what it needed to be. In 1918, the world was changed by war in Europe, and Samuel enlisted despite being older than most recruits, feeling a duty to serve. It was an agonizing year while he was gone, but he returned home safely in 1919, bringing with him a new maturity and stories of a world much larger and more complex than small-town Kansas. "Makes you appreciate what we have here," he told his parents. "Peace, family. Simple things that are not simple at all." "We know," Ezra said, his arm around Beatrice. "We have always known." As the 1920s began, bringing with them new technologies and social changes, Beatrice and Ezra found themselves in the odd position of being living history. The Wild West they had known was largely tamed now, replaced by automobiles and telephones and electric lights. The frontier was closed, the last homesteads claimed, the Indian wars long over. But the values they had lived by, the lessons they had learned and passed on, those remained relevant. Hard work, integrity, commitment, love, these things never went out of style. "We are dinosaurs," Ezra joked one day when Thomas tried to convince him to get a telephone installed at the ranch. "You are legends," Thomas corrected. "There is a difference." In 1925, Beatrice and Ezra celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and the entire town turned out for the occasion. 5 decades of marriage, 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren at that point. A family tree that had started with 2 people and branched out to touch hundreds of lives. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the shade trees Ezra had planted when they first married, now tall and mature. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Ezra led Beatrice onto the makeshift dance floor for a waltz. They moved together as they had for 50 years, perfectly in sync, and watching them, their children and grandchildren saw something rare and precious. A love that had endured everything life could throw at it and emerged not just intact but strengthened. "I love you, Beatrice Porter," Ezra whispered as they swayed to the music. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after, you are my heart." "And you are mine," Beatrice replied, tears streaming down her face. "Always and forever you are mine." When the party ended and the guests had departed and they finally climbed into bed that night, exhausted but happy, Ezra pulled Beatrice close and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes all those years ago. For taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense. For building this life with me." "Thank you for riding down that road," Beatrice replied. "For seeing me, really seeing me, and choosing to stay. Thank you for being the man I always hoped existed but was never sure I would find." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in 50 years of shared memories, shared struggles, shared triumphs. It was not a perfect love story, because perfect did not exist in real life. But it was real and deep and enduring, and that was so much better than perfect. Ezra passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1929, at the age of 78. He had lived a full, rich life, had seen his children and grandchildren thrive, had built something lasting and good. But still, Beatrice felt as though half of herself had been torn away. 74 years old, she had been Ezra's wife for more than half a century, and now she had to figure out how to exist without him. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire town, testament to the man Ezra had been and the lives he had touched. But afterward, when everyone had gone home and Beatrice sat alone in the house that was suddenly too quiet, she let herself break down and sob for everything she had lost. Thomas found her there, his own eyes red from crying. "Mother, come stay with Rebecca and me for a while. You should not be alone." "I will be fine," Beatrice said, though she was not sure that was true. "Your father would want me to be strong." "Father would want you to lean on your family when you need to," Thomas corrected gently. "Please, Mother, for me." So Beatrice spent a month with Thomas and Rebecca, letting them care for her while she navigated the early stages of grief. Charlotte came from Kansas City, and Samuel visited every day, and slowly, with the support of her children, Beatrice began to find her footing again. She would never stop missing Ezra. The absence of him was a constant ache, a phantom limb that would never fully heal. But she had 53 years of memories with him, and 3 children who carried his legacy forward, and a town full of people whose lives had been touched by his kindness and integrity. "I promised you a family," she whispered to his photograph one night. "I promised you roots and home and love." "I kept that promise, Ezra. I hope you knew. I hope you always knew how much you were loved." Beatrice lived another 10 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community until the very end. She died in her sleep in 1939 at the age of 84, surrounded by photographs of the people she loved and the life she had built. At her funeral, 3 generations of former students spoke about the teacher who had changed their lives. Her children shared stories of a mother who had been both loving and strong, who had taught them by example how to face hardship with grace and courage. Her grandchildren remembered a woman who had always had time for them, who had told wonderful stories about the old days and made them feel uniquely special. But it was Thomas who perhaps summed it up best in his eulogy. My mother came to Kansas as a young woman with nothing but hope and a broken locket. She could have given up 100 times, but she never did. She found love with my father, built a family, taught hundreds of children, and left this town better than she found it. That is a life well lived. That is a legacy worth celebrating. They buried her next to Ezra, in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Leavenworth. The headstone reads simply, Beatrice Sullivan Porter, 1855–1939. Beloved wife, mother, teacher, friend. She was promised safety but found danger. The cowboy became the promise that was kept, and beneath, in smaller letters, Ezra James Porter, 1851–1929. Beloved husband, father, rancher. He saved her life and built a life with her. The story of Beatrice and Ezra became part of Leavenworth's history, passed down through generations as an example of frontier love and resilience. Their descendants continue to live in and around the town, carrying forward the values and lessons learned from that remarkable couple. The ranch remained in the family, operated by Thomas, and then by his children, a testament to Ezra's hard work and vision. The school kept its name, Sullivan Porter Academy, honoring Beatrice's decades of service to education. And couples in love would sometimes visit the cemetery to see the grave where Beatrice and Ezra rested side by side, hoping perhaps that some of their enduring love might rub off. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the danger on the road or the hardships faced or the struggles overcome, though all of those were part of the story. What mattered was the love, the deep, abiding, transformative love between two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. Beatrice had been promised safety but found danger. Ezra had become the promise that was kept. And from that foundation, they had created a love story that would be remembered long after both of them were gone, a testament to the power of courage, commitment, and the enduring strength of the human heart.